Just because some tribals were worshipping it does not in fact mean the stick is a holy artifact, Steve insisted. And it's fine. I'll throw it around later for her. Promise. Now, we need to keep moving. He stressed as they moved forward, each of them breaking out a glow globe to light their way. Even though he'd memorized the map, he tugged a small scroll from one of his pockets to look at it as they headed forward through the winding sewer system beneath the city. Why didn't I think to prepare a blessing of pure air? This is most certainly not a pleasant smell, Larry muttered as they moved. Or muttered as much as one with a voice like that could mutter. What did you expect when I told you we'd infiltrate the city through the sewers? Steve asked as they came to a junction which made them stop as he looked down at his map and then around them at the junction. This is new. So which way? Sherry asked. We need to go straight, he said as they looked ahead of them and saw there was no straight path, just a fork heading left or right, and another split off as a hard right. Damn it! Well, what now? Fenrina asked. Time for our tested and true adventuring skills to come through, Steve said as he tucked the scroll back into a pocket. Eeny, meeny, miny that way. He pointed to the left fork as they proceeded once more. The path began to slowly curve further left before they finally came across an old, locked gate. We need to surface. The path is messed up, so I'm not sure we'll be right in the Citadel. We'll just have to risk it, Steve mentioned as he pulled out his lock-picking tools to quickly get the gate open. As they headed up the old and crumbling stairs, they left behind the smell of the sewers, and instead soon came upon a brick wall. Can't throw the stick through that. Stick? No stick! Steve growled as he held his glow globe up to study the brick wall. It's not magistone. Wrong color, which means... He pulled some ingredients from his pouches then, as he began to slather a sticky blue substance to the brick. After a few seconds, the air before them began to get colder and colder until they could hear the cracking of ice as much of the brick broke off from the rest of the wall, now turned to ice. But there was still some past that layer. Got any more of that? Sherry asked, but Steve just shook his head and tapped at the partially broken wall. No, but I can see light. It's pretty thin now. But we don't have enough space for me to summon a rock, and if we used Sherry's fire fists, people would probably see the smoke. Not to mention, we might die from smoke inhalation. We need to throw something through it. He trailed off as he looked over at Larry. Then Sherry and Fenrina followed suit. The dwarf looked up at them and then sighed. Just get it over with already. Larry Love doesn't have time to... As Fenrina hurled the dwarf through the crumbling wall, he landed outside with a thud, and Steve and the others crawled out through the dwarf-sized hole in the wall. Larry was face down in a flower bed, and as the group looked around, they were in a walled garden, as Steve pointed to a statue of an elf standing in a fountain. Faizari the Fair. We're in one of the old gardens, which means we're likely inside the Citadel's outer walls. Perfect. As he pulled his map out to try and get his bearings, Sherry looked over the statue. Wow, she was gorgeous, she commented as Steve just glanced up. Faizari is a guy. When he said that, Sherry just squinted a little and examined the statue once more. Wow, he was gorgeous. She amended with a shrug as Fenrina picked Larry up out of the flower bed and set him on his feet, dusting him off a bit as he coughed up some dirt. Larry Love would like to stipulate for the future that you give him a warning before you throw him through a brick wall. You did say just to get it over with, Fenrina mentioned as she then gave him a hug to try and make it all better. Steve, meanwhile, looked up at the inner walls of the Citadel to their south and nodded as he pointed to a blue tower decorated in banners. That will be the Professor's Tower, which is inside the inner sanctum, he said with confidence as he tucked the map away again. So how do we get in? Sherry asked. We don't. There's no room up there for her experiments. The main keep would have been too conspicuous at the start, which only leaves the catacombs. We should be able to get through the garden and find a way down over there. He waved past the statue. Wait, didn't we just leave the catacombs? Sherry asked. No, that was the sewers. Different systems. They're not connected, Steve explained as they walked forward. But then he held up his arms and stopped the group suddenly. Whoa, stop! Danger! As he did that, the others dropped into a defensive stance, preparing for an attack. But then he pointed to a rabbit in the grass near the gate that led out of the walled garden. "It's a bunny rabbit," Fenrina said. "Yeah, but this is a super secure elven fortress. I've heard about tricks like this. It's probably a dire bunny they've loaded up with super strength potions and minor invulnerability and superior haste and doom teeth. I bet if we get close, that thing will attack and try to rip our throats out." The others looked at Steve with a bit of concern. "Are you sure this isn't just Mr. Blinky Jr. come to avenge his father?" Sherry asked. "You leave Mr. Blinky out of this," Steve hissed. "Just get ready. Prepare for one hell of a fight." The others shrugged and prepared then. Sherry getting her fire magic ready, Larry with his hammer and holy magic, Fenrina with sword and shield, and Steve preparing his own magic. As one, they rushed forward to do battle with the monster, but instead of jumping at them with teeth of doom or super strength, it just turned and ran off into the bushes. The members of Doom stopped their charge then, as they instead stared at Steve. "I still maintain it could have been a serious threat," he growled out. "What's that noise?" they heard a voice ask as the gate to out of the garden opened, and they were face to face with an elven sentry. Seeing them, he gasped, eyes going wide as he got ready to scream for help. But Steve dashed forward and slapped the elf across the face, the force of which sent the elf flying into the side of the gate as he collapsed to the ground in a heap. "What was that?" Sherry gasped out. "It's my own thing. I mixed sleep slap with stone slap," Steve said as he dragged the unconscious elf into the garden. "So if the sleep magic doesn't work, the concussion likely will." "Aren't you going to kill him?" Sherry asked then, but Steve shook his head. "There's no point. He'll be lucky to remember what day it is when he wakes up. Concussions are seriously bad for your mental health. Now let's go." He ushered the others through the gate, closing it behind them. In this part of the fortress, they were just outside of the inner walls of the citadel itself. There were barracks, stables, churches, and a few houses around them on the narrow streets. Thankfully, with the battle raging outside, there didn't seem to be many people around, but they could see more sentries atop the inner walls, so they had to move quickly when there were gaps in the structures that they might be seen in. "Where are we going?" Sherry asked as they got closer and closer to the base of the inner walls. "There." Steve pointed to a large oak tree with bright red leaves besides an old elven church. "How do you know?" Sherry asked. "Since when do the leaves of an oak turn red in this season?" he asked as they headed towards. Past the oak against the hill at the base of the walls was a set of stairs flanked by old, partially crumbling guard statues that no doubt headed into the catacombs just like he planned. Just as they got past the tree, though, the sky grew dark, but bright lanterns strung from the tree branches flashed into brilliant light, bathing them and the ground around them in a rainbow of colors. They could hear cheering and saw two figures dressed in white beneath the tree standing before a priest. But just as their eyes took this all in, day returned, the lights faded, and the elves were gone. "Did we just crash a wedding?" Larry asked as he looked around. "Time echoes, one of the many reasons time magic is so dangerous," Steve muttered as he walked past the smooth, newly carved stone of the immaculate statues and down the stairs. He drew up short, though, as a pair of golems stepped down from the walls that he hadn't expected. Their eyes were bright with arcane energy as they swung their giant stone fists at him. Steve stumbled, barely rolling under the first golem just to slam into the leg of the second. He winced and curled up for a moment, but when nothing happened, he opened his eyes and looked up at the now suddenly inert golems. Their bodies cracked and aged. "This is going to get old. This is going to get very annoying very fast," Sherry muttered as she helped Steve up and they headed down into the catacombs. "Should we be worried about guards?" Fenrina asked as she took the lead. "I doubt it. Who would want to stand guard in a place where time is skipping like this? My bet is she has a shielded chamber where time isn't skipping around. We just have to find it," Steve mentioned as they kept moving. The catacombs were a mess of different ages as they tried to navigate them. They'd stumble across grieving elves. Freshly laid flowers would turn to ash before their eyes, and then back into flowers. The candles would burn down to nothing, and then refill only to burn again. "What if some of them are alive again?" Sherry asked. "What?" Steve looked at her. "In their tombs. What if some of them came back and are trapped inside trying to get out?" They looked around them at the ornate stone tombs and sarcophaguses before Steve shuddered. "Well, that's a horrifying thought, but there's nothing we can do about it except put an end to all this." As they rounded the next corner, Steve looked left and right, trying to figure out which way to go before heading right. "What if some of them are alive again?" Sherry asked. "What?" Steve looked at her. "In their tombs. What if some of them came back and are trapped inside, trying to get out?" They looked around them at the ornate stone tombs and sarcophaguses before Steve shuddered, and then frowned. "Well, it's a horrifying thought, but didn't we just—" He trailed off as they came to a corner, and he looked left and right trying to figure out which way to go. He was about to head right, but paused, and instead picked left. Picking up the pace, he took the lead and then wheezed hard as he saw the others well ahead of him. "I don't like this place one bit. Come on and keep up," Larry called back as Steve coughed and gasped, looking over his shoulder, wondering just what had happened. "I'm coming already, damn kids!" He leaned hard on his walking stick as he tossed his long gray beard over his shoulder and then looked down over his body for a moment. "What in the various hells?" He stumbled forward then and cried out as he fell. But just before he could hit the ground, he tucked his shoulder in and rolled, lunging forward and bouncing to his feet as he sprinted after the others. "Hey, wait for me! Why can't I control the volume of my voice?" He squeaked out his voice, seeming to shatter at least once per word. When he caught up to the others, Sherry looked back and then gasped, jumping a little. "What happened? Why is your face like that?" Steve clutched at his face as she said that, and felt what seemed like dozens of zits as he squealed in a rather unmanly fashion. "My face! It was never this bad, I swear!" He pushed forward as he ran ahead of them, seeing an elven statue holding a basin of water besides another tomb. He leaned over to look at his reflection just in time to see his regular face. His well-trimmed goatee was back, and his skin was clear of any blemishes. He gasped with relief then, and sagged against the basin just as he heard a rough crack, and the arms holding the basin moved down. He jumped back from the statue, fearing it was about to break, but instead the arms just clicked back up into place as the wall besides the statue slid back. "Well, that was lucky." "Is that what you looked like when you were a teenager?" Sherry asked as the others caught up. "No, I swear, that was like the worst possible version I could ever be back then. Now let's get in there and finish this." He pointed into the secret passage as he made sure Fenrina took the lead. "Are you sure this is the place?" Sherry asked as they all filed in after the werehusky. "We aren't skipping in time anymore, and it's a secret passage in a catacomb. It has to be the right way," Steve assured her. Sure enough, they came out in a wide chamber with bookshelves lining the walls and tables spread throughout covered in texts, runes, and various magic-infused stones and artifacts. But what took their focus would be the altar of sorts on the far side of the chamber. Within a stone cradle as a bright blue-white orb, and standing behind it was an elven woman dressed in green and blue robes, Professor Afrosia. "Intruders!" As they heard the call, the group noticed the elven soldiers move away from the walls and take up positions between them and the professor. There were about 24 soldiers in the elven glass armor of the Alsaurian elite guard, but more specifically, Steve recognized the figure at their center. The white-haired elf didn't wear armor or a helmet, and his face and arms were crisscrossed with the scars of thousands of sword fights. The legendary swordsman Larazitsloran Nizef. Steve forgot how many further apostrophes his name went on, but it hardly mattered. "I don't know how you knew about all of this, but once that army showed up unannounced, I knew you were behind it," the professor said as she looked up from the orb. "You just can't resist the urge to mess around with forces you don't understand, can you, human?" "That's rich coming from the woman fucking around with time and space. The echoes have consumed the catacombs. How long before they consume the whole city?" he called back. "They wouldn't have grown that far if you hadn't shown up. I knew the stone would conceal my work, but it also prevents me from unleashing it inside these walls." and I will unleash it very soon against your despicable nation. Soon I shall be erasing the greatest error history ever allowed. Once the siege is broken, we will take this into the open, and I shall step forth into the past and undo you, undo your blight upon the world." Steve frowned as she spoke like that. "Why? Why hate us so much?" he asked as he waved his hands around. "Why do this? Why any of it? What have we done to wrong you? It's you who showed me the future." She pointed at him, which made Steve blink and frown in confusion. "Me?" He looked around, knowing there couldn't be anyone else she was pointing at, but still feeling like there must be. "When you first came to Orbitus, I watched the promise of the other two with pleasant surprise. Guided by elven and dwarven teachings, I knew they'd go far. Better the world. Better our understanding of magic." The professor smiled a moment before she pointed at Steve once more. "But you, I saw how you probed and prodded, testing everything you were taught. There was no end to your questioning and experimenting. You provoke the very essence of magic itself, twisting and abusing it as if it is nothing more than a tool to be broken and shaped however you see fit. I realized that is the way of humanity. I looked upon your home and saw it lousy with these examples, conquering all before you and changing them, replacing the culture of those who once lived there with your own, absorbing everything around you. There will be no end to it." She shook her head before going on. "The other nations might not be there yet, but once they see what you've done, I can see it all now, carving new paths through the soil to erase whole rivers at your whim, tearing apart mountains to get iron and gems, the very animals enslaved and bred in unholy combinations just to get more meat, the unstoppable, unquenchable thirst of humanity for more land, more resources, more money, more power. You lack satisfaction. Nothing will ever be enough. Your kind will twist and break this very planet to your whim. This cannot be allowed. You would see it enslaved or dead so it may better suit your needs. The Archon is blind if she cannot see this fate for magic itself should more humans be allowed to sully and degrade it with your filthy hands. She will never know to thank me once I am done. Humanity will cease to be a threat upon this world. Elves shall take our rightful place ruling over Taleron in harmony. The unspoiled nature of much of this land shall be preserved, not swept away for more of your spawn. Balance, harmony, and peace shall prevail." She insisted then as she ended her speech. Steve stood in silence for a minute, collecting his thoughts before finally speaking. I can't say that you're wrong in some regards. We will erase rivers, tear apart mountains, and breed animals. And Almera does have a habit of expanding and converting, but your answer to all of that is to simply try and unmake us from reality?" he asked. "You didn't think maybe we should try and teach them moderation, or that maybe my constant testing and experimenting with magic would lead to great things? Has it? Or have you simply learned how to better destroy things?" she hissed out. "Well, shit, I've only been at this a year. I need some fucking time," Steve gasped out. "And that's besides the point. How can you think it's fair to try and wipe us out? Why do you get to make this decision? You say you'll rule in peace and harmony and that bullshit, but rather than talk, you just try to make us unexist. There will always be some of you who hunt for more. I've seen it in your eyes already. You dabble in blood magic and necromancy. If you are the future of human mages, then I need no more proof," she asked. "It's about how you use the magic. You're using time magic for evil. Think about it. You could use it for good. Speed up the growth of plants and we could feed the world. Or undo the damage to the bits of the environment you think we've destroyed. Why all this hate? Regardless of the battle out there, we can stop all of this. Today. We can actually work together for real harmony, real balance, real peace. We'll talk it out with the council. We'll find a way to make it work." Steve watched her then, hoping that there was a chance they could still end this without a fight, especially since he had no idea how they'd deal with the elven swordmaster. "No, the threat of humanity to the world is too great," she replied. "And I'll make sure that you lose here and your Almarin kin lose the battle outside. You're just in time to witness my latest mastery over the very fabric of time and space." She began to chant then, and Steve watched intently as she twisted and turned her hands, using an ancient dialect from the days before even the elves' first kingdoms. She raised her hands and then spoke clearly at the end. "Come to me, all Saurian champions across time. Come to my defense so we may rain glory and victory upon our people once more." There was a flash in the room for a moment as a dozen more figures came into being behind the line of guards already in place. Steve looked between them and recognized them all immediately. They were all legendary figures that any adventurer would know from description alone. Avloria and her twin blades, Crest-Twizzit Orion the ranger, Saliava the sorceress, even Larezit Hapesnaispa, father of the also legendary swordsman already here. Steve, Sherry, Larry, and Fenrina were face to face with more than a dozen champions now, and any one of them alone would likely strain their skills to their very limits. But as Professor Afrosia grinned triumphantly from behind them, Steve just laughed. "You've already lost!" he shouted as she frowned. "What are you talking about? Your death lies before you. Nothing can save you," she hissed. "Two things. First, you just asked for your champions across time, and everyone who showed up is a known legend, meaning they're all from the past. Not one of them is unknown to us, which means you have no future. And second, they're all known for being amazing solo fighters. You're expecting a bunch of people who fight alone to suddenly show up and fight great together? And actually third, shit, I should have said three things. Whatever, you let me watch you cast. Sherry Barrier, he cried out as he raised his hands to start casting. Sherry quickly brought up a barrier before the group, then several arrows slammed into it and the other champions advanced on them quickly. But they weren't quick enough before Steve shouted out, "Come to me, Almarans from across time. I need the best team we have to offer to defend me in this time of need, to defend Almera, to defend humanity, to defend the world." He didn't have the same control over the forces of time and space as the professor, but as he focused, a tear in the air beside him opened up, and a single figure stepped through. Steve frowned as he examined the human who didn't look like anyone he'd ever met. He was wearing a very strange triangular hat, and was wearing a long red coat that ran into striped pants and tall leather boots. Steve also noticed that the sword he was holding was unlike he'd ever seen, and for some reason the man's giant black beard seemed to be smoking. "What's this? Looks like magic is fucking with us again, boys! You! What's the deal?" His wide grin was filled with gold, which made Steve blink in surprise before he pointed at the professor. "She's trying to unmake humanity, and Almera." As Steve said that, the man hollered out in rage. "What? Not on our watch! For the Empire, boys! Kill 'em all and steal anything not nailed down!" The man hollered out and pointed with his curved sword. There was a yell then that echoed out from the rip in space beside Steve as he watched a whole horde suddenly start to stream forth from the open portal. As Steve watched, the first wave was struck down by arrows from the elven champions, but more just kept pouring out, and as they clashed, some drew small tubes that seemed to explode in their hands, the booming sound echoing out through the chamber and hurting Steve's ears as he watched. "Steve!" He finally heard Sherry screaming in his ear as she yanked him away from the portal just as her barrier failed. By now, the chamber was filled with chaos as the dozens of humans rushing out of the portal were fighting with the elven champions. Even as he watched the unarmored humans get struck down, it seemed like 3 or 4 would take their place. But he realized it wasn't just humans. There were dwarves, half-gen, and to his surprise, even elves rushing out to sink their blades into the Alsaurian legends. He was transfixed with what he was watching, and all he could do was stay close behind Fenrina as she blocked and parried with sword and shield to keep him alive.